Starting today, my husband suggested we move in with my parents. Since they're my parents, it shouldn't be a problem, right? But it caught me off guard. I was shocked and almost cried because he didn't mention it before. Just a few days ago, we said goodbye to my dad at his funeral. He had been sick for a long time. Even though we were still feeling sad from the funeral, my husband packed our things and left our house. He said we were going to a villa my dad left for me. Surprisingly, my in-laws were already there, staying in the villa. My name's Natalie. I'm 33 years old, and I work as a designer. I've been living with Justin, my husband, for 3 years since we got married. My job is going well, and I think I'm a pretty successful designer. I earn enough money to have an apartment in my name. My mom passed away when I was in college, and last year, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. He tried treatment, but it didn't work, and the doctors said we should prepare for the worst. When my mom passed away, I was already living on my own. But my dad always kept in touch, especially after I started working. He was really important to me. When I found out how sick he was, I was devastated. I worried about him all the time, and my husband kept asking me about his health. But honestly, I didn't think he really cared. It felt like he was just waiting for my dad to die. My husband always seemed insecure because he made less money than me. I wished he'd be proud of my achievements and support me when things got tough. But he acted childish. He was always competing and only seemed happy when he was winning. My dad told us not to worry about him and to focus on our relationship, but I thought we should spend time with him while we still could. That way, we wouldn't regret it later. I started to resent my husband more and more. In the beginning of our marriage, he was loving and caring, but his insensitive comments about my dad's illness hurt too much. I couldn't believe how much he changed. My husband works from home, and he said having me around distracts him. So I rented an office and started commuting. Even though I was busy with work and taking care of my dad, my husband didn't help with anything at home. He lived selfishly and didn't care about my feelings. Living with him made me realize how little he understood me, and I felt really lonely. Then my dad died. We had already sold our family home, so I was busy with funeral arrangements. But my husband was always on the phone or disappearing. He didn't seem interested in helping me at all. I begged him to help, especially during such a hard time. But he just brushed me off, saying he was getting a lot of work calls. I was so angry and disappointed in him. Losing my dad made me feel even more hurt by his coldness. On the day of the funeral, I felt incredibly sad. After spending a long time talking with his parents, my husband came back smirking. Their suspicious looks made me feel even more alone. But despite that, the cremation, interment, and inheritance stuff went smoothly, and the funeral ended well. Then, out of the blue, my husband suggested we move in with my parents. He said, "They're your parents, so it shouldn't be a problem, right? If you're against it, should we get divorced?" He said it like it was a joke, but I couldn't stay calm. I strongly opposed the idea, especially since we didn't have any extra rooms in our apartment. One room was used as my workspace and for storing my husband's work stuff. But he just smiled and said we should live in the villa I inherited. It was a special place for me, filled with memories of my dad. I wanted to keep it that way, but my husband didn't seem to care. He kept making selfish demands. I tried to explain that living there would be tough, but he wouldn't listen. His parents had already decided to move there. They probably planned it during the funeral. Since the villa was big and peaceful, they liked it. Their move was already in progress, and I couldn't object. Every time I spoke up, my husband got mad. He accused me of only thinking about myself and being absent from home. "Because of your father's illness and all those sudden calls, do you even realize how much I've put up with? Your obsession with your father has been too much to handle." His words were harsh, and I felt like my world was falling apart. "Now that your father's gone, you need to listen to me. It took him a whole year to die, which was way too long," he continued, his tone cold and heartless. I couldn't believe this was the man I married. He showed no respect for my father or me. I remembered how my dad looked in pain in his hospital bed. He wouldn't have wanted me to just obey my husband like this. In that moment, I realized all my love for my husband had disappeared. It hurt to think about how he found joy in getting the villa while I was mourning my father's death. But I held back my emotions and warned him about regretting his decision. I packed the essentials and left our home, leaving my husband puzzled. I didn't want to say anything more to him. It was painful to see my in-laws, who probably couldn't wait for my father to die so they could move in. But I followed my husband silently. The only thing I couldn't accept was him taking over my special place. The villa, although technically a villa, was just a regular home by the sea, where ordinary people lived. However, the villa's location was quite convenient, being easily accessible from the city center, and the land itself held considerable value. As I stepped out of the station, the familiar scenery of my childhood greeted me. I remembered how my mother used to be alive, and whenever I dozed off on the train, my father would carry me on his back all the way home. When we reached the villa, my in-laws were already inside. I started to suspect something fishy, realizing that my husband had secretly given them a key without my knowledge. This made me even more uneasy, sensing a secret plan to move in without my consent. Looking around the villa, I saw my in-laws' eyes shining with excitement for their future life here. Despite being a single-family home, the sturdy furniture my father had chosen was arranged in a slightly different European style, probably to my mother's taste. But their ecstatic comments irritated me. They seemed to underestimate the significance of my father's passing, seeing the villa merely as a luxurious house. Their lack of sensitivity became even more apparent when my husband joined in, laughing as they opened beers to toast the move. I sighed deeply, feeling the precious memories I shared with my parents at the dining table being tainted. I decided to hide my feelings and endure the night. The next morning, my mother-in-law's scream shattered the quiet atmosphere of the villa, instantly alerting me. When I woke up, I noticed my father-in-law and husband causing a commotion, but it took me a moment to reach the source of the scream. In the bathroom, my mother-in-law was on the floor, clutching her foot with a panicked expression. She explained that the floor had given way beneath her, but when my husband and father-in-law checked, everything seemed fine. As they examined the floor, I suggested they try stepping on a slightly differently colored part. When they did, the floorboard made a sound and slightly sunk, but then snapped back into place when lifted. I explained that it was intentional, part of what my father called a mechanical mansion or a trick house. He was a huge ninja enthusiast, and this villa was his pride and joy. He had installed traps and mechanisms throughout the villa, including floorboards that seemed to collapse but were actually harmless. As someone familiar with the house since childhood, I had no trouble navigating it, but my husband and in-laws, being unfamiliar, were shocked. They hadn't realized what they were getting into by moving here. With our apartment lease canceled and nowhere else to go, they were pressing my husband on what to do next. In the midst of this, both my father-in-law and husband accidentally triggered another trap, causing them to fall. "Please feel free to stay as long as you like," I said, but my tone was more mocking than genuine. They had been so enchanted by the luxury of the villa, ignoring my warnings and showing no interest in my father's hobbies. Now their oversight was coming back to bite them. Even when I explained the dangers of the traps, they didn't take it seriously. "We'll get used to it," my husband said confidently. "I'll head back to the apartment to prepare for our move," I replied, leaving them in the villa. But in reality, I had no moving preparations. I planned to take a few days off and sort through my father's belongings. As expected, after just 2 days, my husband and in-laws had had enough. Meanwhile, I found solace being by myself and could slowly regain a positive outlook, planning my new life. Before long, my father's villa became a minor tourist attraction in the neighborhood. It was regularly featured in local newsletters as the trick mansion hidden in a residential area. Reflecting on this, I remembered strangers touring the villa and local children playing there, making it a lively spot. Since my upbringing had made me proficient in foreign languages, I could manage calls from foreign visitors. But my husband and in-laws couldn't understand foreign languages at all. Along with the nerve-wracking lifestyle of constantly worrying about the traps, they were overwhelmed by unexpected visitors and handling calls in foreign languages. Exhausted and sleep-deprived, they stumbled back to the apartment. "Why don't we all live in this apartment together?" "Think about it," I suggested. They had longed for my father's demise to get their hands on the villa, only to give it up in just 2 days. Instead of serving them tea, I handed my husband the divorce papers, already filled out and stamped in my section. "There's no way we can live together. If you understand, just leave quickly," I explained with a deep sigh. I couldn't forgive him for disregarding my feelings and acting insensitively without consulting me or giving any explanation. My husband decided we'd live with his parents. Moreover, he had never shared household responsibilities with me before. He dumped all the household responsibilities onto me, and when I felt cornered, he seemed indifferent about it. He ignored my feelings, acted selfishly, and secretly decided to move in with his parents. I couldn't imagine continuing to live with someone like that. "What happened? You used to love me, right?" he asked obliviously. I couldn't help but laugh at his usual oblivious remarks. "You think I could love someone who wished for my beloved father's early death and would rejoice when he passed?" I handed him only the divorce papers and drove them out of the apartment. "First of all, this is my apartment. If you have a problem, you should be the one to leave." My husband raised his voice, but I responded calmly, reminding him that the apartment was under my name. They fell silent upon hearing my words. They relied on me financially and didn't have much of their own. However, I had made up my mind to cut ties before their lengthy persuasions began. Neither my husband nor my in-laws had much in savings after being evicted from the apartment and being unable to return to the villa. They now live in a cheap, low-quality apartment and are barely getting by. At first, my husband felt guilty and apologized frequently, but over time, he grew resentful of his parents. Due to their age, they rarely worked, and when they did, it didn't last long. In the end, they exhausted their savings and pension with every move, constantly argued, and became estranged as a family. The walls of the apartment were thin, letting out their daily quarrels. Even when they received noise complaints, they didn't apologize. Instead, they retaliated, causing them to be disliked by their neighbors. They might need to find a new place to live soon. My husband previously enjoyed working from home, but in the current apartment, he didn't have the luxury of a dedicated workspace. Unable to concentrate on his job, his reputation and sales plummeted. Now, he barely gets by with a late-night convenience store job and should consider juggling multiple part-time jobs. The in-laws felt their biggest mistake was letting their son control their decisions. In their frequent arguments, they blamed the villa's traps. "If you had been more responsible, we wouldn't be in this situation," they argued. "You should have checked properly." "Don't blame me now," my husband countered. "I never imagined we'd end up like this because of our son," she said, reflecting on how her parents had always wished to inherit the villa and were overjoyed when her father passed away. I will never forget that after the divorce, I made significant strides in my career as a designer. To process her father's death and all these events, she created designs incorporating ninja elements and showcased them on social media. Their popularity spread rapidly, and one day a major cosmetics company contacted her to design packaging with an Asian touch incorporating ninja elements. She felt this work would preserve her father's cherished memories. Of course, I eagerly took on this project and committed fully to it. Ultimately, it was a huge success, propelling my career forward and allowing me to give joyful updates at my parents' graves. She retained the mechanical house, keeping it as a special place filled with memories of her father. She began organizing tour schedules and, with a little tweaking, turned it into a space where both tourists and local children could enjoy for free. Soon, the house attracted significant media attention, and the income from this exposure helped to defray ongoing costs. Furthermore, online articles about the house were translated into foreign languages, leading to support from international fans. Some of the donations even came from elderly folks who shared my father's passion for ninjas. She remained dedicated to the ongoing upkeep of this magical place. Meanwhile, the mechanical house remained a daily hub of activity, a favorite among local children. Although I lost my father and the inheritance of the villa resulted in my divorce, I feel the gains have been greater than the losses, she reflected. The villa has transformed into a memory-rich location shared with family and friends. I've also undergone a personal transformation, moving forward with renewed optimism and hope.